Good evening, everyone. I couldn't sleep. It's about 1:20 in the morning, and I was just laying there in bed thinking, and I was reflecting a bit on today. Reflecting a bit on the images I keep seeing, the news that keeps coming, the riots and the protests. This is my backyard. This is America. I've been all around the world, been more than 50 countries. I've been into war zones. I've seen tear gas canisters. I've seen bodies, but they weren't our bodies. They weren't our canisters. It wasn't our country. And it's a rude awakening to see it happen in our own backyard. So on Twitter, I noticed a picture of National Guard that had been deployed to the Lincoln Memorial, standing guard over it. And I couldn't help but think to myself that they weren't protecting the monument. Rather, they were imprisoning the memory of the person the monument was built for. Monuments in America are very different than the monuments in Europe. They're very different from the monuments in Asia in that we don't build monuments to kings, to people who were born into things or these deities of long past. We build monuments to people that did great things. They came from amongst us. They were the underdogs. They were people that weren't supposed to win, yet they did. And because of that, we're inspired by them, the memory of them. I think the Abraham Lincoln and what he endured, as soon as he was elected, it split our nation in half. And it created a situation where he had to make difficult decisions that he knew would result in the death of many people. And as the war dragged on and criticism continued, he had to make compromise after compromise, from the suspension of habeas corpus to understanding the reality that the entire economic order of the United States would have to be changed. And it was very uncertain how Reconstruction was going to work after the pieces were put back together, if they could even be put back together. And despite all of that, he rose to the occasion. He never lost faith in the American people. And he realized that even the people he was fighting for our nation to be whole, they would at some point have to get back together. I remember a photo I saw years ago when I was a lot younger about a Union soldier and a Confederate soldier smoking cigars together before the Battle of Gettysburg. It turns out that they were brothers, and they had snuck out of each other's respective camps to basically share a drink and some final words before a battle that actually ended up killing both of them. That, in essence, was the greatest symbol of that conflict. And despite the differences, the bloodshed, and the horrors that we unleashed on each other during that time period, we found a way to get back together and become one nation again. We have a lot of protesters and rioters running around. Some are influenced by foreign powers, whether it be China or Russia, or propaganda attempts to cause strife and discord in our nation. Always happens, always has happened. During the 1930s, many Americans forget that the American Nazi Party had hundreds of thousands of members, and the Communist Party was quite strong as well, both seeking to overthrow the American government. Many of these protesters are good people who are just fed up and tired because they perceive, and oftentimes with great justification and evidence, that there are divides in our nation that go beyond economic means, but also racial. I recall growing up in Hawaii and being called a haole because I was white. I recall living in Japan, and despite being treated with dignity and friendliness, it was very clear that I could never be Japanese, regardless of what I tried, and society treated me differently. I can only imagine those who exist in a reality where, because of the color of their skin, they experience tremendous hardship and persecution, in some cases generationally, and perceive that policies no longer work in their favor or have never worked in their favor. How much anger can exist there? These are legitimate grievances, and they should never be diminished. They should never be considered substandard or secondary or told, well, it will just get better, because it never does seem to get better. So they take to the streets in March and say, please change it. And most of them are young. Young people are magical in that they're not indoctrinated to the systems of the past. They have the ability to look at things in a different way, and they're not in love with the system to the extent that they desire to protect and preserve it. So from that perspective, they can provide a nuance that society requires so that we can progress and grow and change. But we should never fall in love with the idea that the young have the wisdom, experience, and skills necessary to build the society that they demand. The reality is that what they demand must come from all of us. And the oldest and the wisest in particular have to repurpose the skills that they have and the knowledge that they have to allow us to get out of the situations we're in. If we continue down this road, the soldiers standing on those monuments won't just protect these old pieces of stone, which are symbolic in that they're supposed to remind us of how we ought to be. They'll start shooting on people, and those people will shoot back. If we continue to say that force is the only way to solve these problems, we will end up seeing just as much blood in the streets as we saw during the Civil War, if not more so, because the weapons are better now. The oppression is more precise. The skills we've gained from the occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan have trained generations of people on how to put down insurgencies in very effective ways and means. And both sides of these conflicts will use these techniques and tools on each other to devastating effect. I don't want to wake up in a country like that. I don't think anybody wants to wake up in a country like that. And we must set our ego and our pride aside. And we have to ask ourselves, what the hell does this all mean? Honestly, set the propaganda aside, the media aside, the divisions aside, these vacuous terms like white privilege and social justice, these vacuous terms like snowflake, whatever the hell they all mean, just set them aside for a moment and ask ourselves, are we also different from each other? Honestly, are our neighbors so different from each other? Yes, we have different stories. Yes, we grew up in different places. Yes, we have different values and priorities, but God damn it, we are Americans. We have the same rights, the same freedoms, the same marketplace, and we ought to aspire to the fact that we can trust each other, love each other, and care for each other. Because if not, then the very freedoms that we've been entrusted to preserve and keep and enjoy, we don't deserve them. We really honestly don't. Not until we can look at a society and say it's fair for all. And if it's not, then we must reevaluate this entire American experiment. As much criticism as our nation has levied on the communist powers of the 20th century and the dictators we seek to topple and sometimes install, at least they were honest enough to say that they didn't trust their people. Rather, they feared them and thus must oppress them to preserve their monarchies, their totalitarianism reign. Yet we tell our people, we trust you. Then we don't trust them enough not to burn down the very monuments that should inspire them. I, for one, say if they want to burn it down, then let them. Because in the ruins and the ashes, we can have a legitimate and honest conversation about who we are as a people and where the hell do we want to go as a people. And if we have to sacrifice a stone statue to have that conversation for once in the ashes of it, and for everyone to calm down, it's a price we can pay. In our own history, the British didn't take us too seriously after the Revolutionary War and continued to harass us and press our sailors, and we stood up for ourselves in the War of 1812. And the cost of that was the destruction of quite a significant monument. The White House burnt to the ground. And despite the stalemate, the world understood that we would stand up for ourselves regardless of the consequences, and it established a solidity about our national character. And this is where we're at. We should never condone the destruction of private property. We should never condone the violence and atrocities against other people. But we should also never forget that the people rioting are children, angry children who want something different. And they're smart enough to know that the way that we do things will not change society. They don't actually know how to change it yet. They don't know how to articulate where we ought to go because they're not old enough and skilled enough and wise enough to take us there. But they sure as hell know what we have is not moral, just, or fair. And they sure as hell know that what we're being sold is hypocrisy at the greatest of levels. So they do what they can do. They do what they can only do, which is act out, just like all children do. And sometimes that has deadly impact and consequences. Sometimes it hurts innocent, good people, and we should never tolerate it and do what we can to prevent it. But then you have to ask yourself, is shooting them, beating them up, bloodying them, diminishing them, demeaning them the way to solve that problem? Or do you acknowledge and say, I hear you, I see you, you matter, and the things you're talking about are real, they're meaningful. Let's have a discussion about it. The ones that are unwilling to have a discussion, those are the ones that society can tolerate being silenced because society itself will silence them because it'll recognize that they're no longer part of any path to a solution. But it's not a good idea to silence all of them. I'm sad. I'm just truly sad because I see where this goes. I've seen it happen in the arc of history, and I've seen it happen to other great nations, and I never believed I'd see it here. And we are truly at a moment, an edge, a precipice, and we have to decide who are we going to be and where do we want to go. This has nothing to do with who gets to be president. As far as I'm concerned, the legitimacy, power, glory, the faith we have in that institution is gone. It's been eroded for decades, and it's gotten to a point where no one particularly cares. The awe of hearing the president address the nation from the Oval Office and calm all of us down is lost. We don't have that institution anymore to rely upon. Thus, we have to look at things differently. Despite all of this, the thing that really made me happy was to see a police officer take off his helmet and tell the protesters, I understand you, I hear you, let's turn this protest into a parade and join them. And you know what happened? The violence stopped, the anger stopped, and people had a bit of a glimmer of hope. They were treated like adults and given enough trust and faith that they could behave that way. That's the beginning of a conversation we all need to have. It's the beginning of a place we all need to go. So I know that many of you perhaps will disagree with me or feel that perhaps we need to do certain things. And it's okay. It's okay for all of us to disagree without being disagreeable. But you all have to understand that if we want to honor the legacy of those statues that were built and the people who sacrificed so much who came before us to give us what we have today, we must have the strength and the character as a nation to confront our problems, our disagreements head on with integrity, faith, trust, and respect, and accept that sometimes things get broken and burned. Property can always be repaired and restored. Sometimes horrible things are said, grievances are created, egos are shattered, blood is spilled. Yet we can always heal and move on if we need to. I'd like to do that with all of you. I'd like the American people to do that with all of you. And I don't want to see our military turned on us, and our military turned on our military, our police turned on our military, I don't want to see a civil war. I don't want to see this chaos keep pushing us. I don't want to see society continue to break down. And I no longer want to see people profit from human misery, whether it be the media or the private prisons or any of these other institutions that have become so thoroughly corrupted and broken. In a word, let's do better. Let's be better. Let's wake up tomorrow and have just a slightly different perspective and understand that everyone's in a lot of hurt right now and a lot of pain right now. And if we acknowledge that, I think we can finally start on the road to recovery. Maybe then we'll be worthy of the monuments that were built for us.